The complete history of the 37 years of the Sui Dynasty in one go. People always tend to use the length of time as a measure of whether a dynasty is powerful or not. But the Sui Dynasty is an exception. Although it lasted just over 30 years, it achieved what many dynasties couldn't accomplish in centuries. It established the earliest imperial examination system and the longest Grand Canal, and accumulated wealth that could sustain the country for 50 years. It is said that, after the fall of the Sui Dynasty, the grain left to the Tang Dynasty took them over a decade to consume. So, why did such a glorious dynasty collapse so dramatically? It all starts with their emperor. Yang Jian, the founding emperor of the Sui Dynasty, was originally a great general of the northern Zhou, but a marriage gradually gave him the idea of seizing the throne. The key figures of the marriage were Yang Jian's daughter Yang Lihua and Emperor Zhuan of northern Zhou, Yuan Yan. Initially, being the emperor's father-in-law was a joyous event, but his son-in-law, Emperor Zhuan, was cruel and tyrannical, and abused his power after ascending the throne, which inevitably caused discontent among the ministers. Moreover, although Yan Lihua was the legitimate empress, her serious and dignified manner didn't please Emperor Zhuan through softness. Thus, she fell out of his favor, since Emperor Zhuan disliked Yang Lihua. He often scolded her without reason, and even wanted to exterminate her entire family. Fortunately, her mother, Dogu Jialuo, pleaded for her life at great risk, and Emperor Zhuan finally relented. From then on, Yang Jian harbored deep hatred for Yuan Yan, and seeing how unpopular the emperor was, he began to contemplate replacing him. In the year 580 AD, Emperor Zhuan fell gravely ill. Yang Jian took advantage of the situation by forging an imperial edict appointing himself regent to assist the young emperor and manage state affairs. From that moment on, all military and state affairs of northern Zhou were under Yang Jian's control. In the year 581 AD, Yang Jian found the timing perfect and forced his nominal grandson, Emperor Jing of northern Zhou, Yuan Chan, to abdicate, and declared himself emperor. Thus, Emperor Wen of Sui ascended to the throne, and changed the state's name to Sui. The character for Sui originally meant to follow, or to proceed, which was considered inauspicious, so it was changed to the current form of Sui. Some say that throughout history, gaining the world through virtue was only ever achieved by emperors like Yang Jian, meaning Yang Jian's conquest of the empire came with relative ease. But the world was still in turmoil at that time. At this point, the Sui Dynasty was only a regional power. For Yang Jian to secure his position, he had to deal with the Chun Dynasty in the south, and the harassment from the nomadic Turks in the north. In 583 AD, Yang Jian used a combination of political division and military strikes to divide the Turks into Eastern and Western Turks, and subdued the Eastern Turks entirely. The Eastern Turks not only pledged allegiance as a vassal state, but also gave Yang Jian an honorary title, calling him Sage Khan of unspoken words. And they said that from the heavens above to the earth below, wherever the sun and moon shine, only the Sage Khan reigns supreme. Today is a grand day. May the Sage Khan live for 10,000 years, and always be as glorious as today. Yang Jian never expected such flattery from the uncultured Turk leader, and he couldn't stop grinning with delight. So, he married Princess Yicheng to the Eastern Turks, to Khan Kimin. From then on, the two families became in-laws. After dealing with the Turks, the Sui dynasty's only remaining enemy was the Chun dynasty in the south. But before he could defeat the Chun, Yang Jian needed to make some pre-war preparations. And that was to stabilize internal affairs. Because before the Sui Dynasty, state affairs were all managed by a single chancellor, which easily led to deception, or even usurpation of the throne. Yang Jian himself had been the Grand Chancellor of Northern Zhou, so he knew well the pitfalls of that office, undermining the emperor's authority. Therefore, he divided the chancellor's power into three, establishing the 3 departments and 6 ministries system, namely, the Department of State Affairs, the Secretariat, and the Chancellery. The Department of State Affairs, also known as the Central Secretariat, was the legislative branch, responsible for drafting national policies. Its chief officer was called the Zhangshou Ling, and the deputy officer was called Zhangshou Shilang. The actual work was done by officials called Zhangshou Shuren. The Chancellery was the Judicial Oversight Department, responsible for reviewing these policies, to ensure they didn't violate basic national principles. Its chief officer was called the Shizhong, and the deputy officer was called Mengsha Shilang. The actual work was done by the officials called Geishizong. The workers were called to serve the chief minister. The final one, the Department of State Affairs, was the executive branch, responsible for the actual implementation of policies. Its chief officer was called the Shangshu Ling, which was usually left vacant. There were 2 deputy officers, called the left and right push of the Department of State Affairs. The 3 departments were independent of each other, yet they balanced each other out. The Shangshu Sheng was responsible for actual administrative work, so it had a large number of subordinates. Thus, 6 administrative departments were established. First, the Ministry of Personnel, responsible for appointing and dismissing officials. Second, the Ministry of Revenue, in charge of land, household registration and national finance. Third, the Ministry of Rights, managing rights and foreign affairs. Fourth, the Ministry of War, in charge of the military. Fifth, the Ministry of Justice, responsible for laws and judicial affairs. Lastly, the Ministry of Works, handling engineering, waterworks, and transportation. The head of each department was called Shangshu. For example, the well-known Minister of War, or the Minister of Justice. Their deputies were called Shilang. For instance, the Deputy Minister of War, which is similar to today's Deputy Minister of Defense. This was the 3 departments and 6 ministries system. This system was highly effective. Even after the fall of the Sui Dynasty, it continued for over 1,000 years. In addition, the selection of talents greatly troubled Emperor Yang Jian. Before the Sui Dynasty, Chinese history had 3 major systems for selecting officials. First, the hereditary system of the Spring and Autumn and Warring States periods. Second, the recommendation system of the Han Dynasty, where matching the right person with the right role was key. As long as it matched, you got the job. You were hired. Third, the 9-rank system during the Wei, Jin, and Southern and Northern dynasties. Officials were selected based on family background. The better the family, the higher the rank. But this did not guarantee capable officials, just a good father. Therefore, Yang Jian carried out significant reforms. In short, to become an official, one had to pass an exam. This was the Great Imperial Examination System. It gave ordinary people the chance to change their fate, and this system was over 1,000 years ahead of the rest of the world. The United States did not pass the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act until 1883, which required exams for government positions. In addition, to solidify his rule, and win people's hearts. Yang Jian implemented a humane land development policy. He also reduced punishments, abolishing the former brutal corporal punishments. Moreover, it was stipulated that the death penalty must be approved by the emperor before being carried out. However, he also emphasized that the 10 gravest crimes could not be pardoned. The phrase, 10 evil deeds cannot be forgiven, comes from this. Yang Jian's series of reforms not only had a profound influence on future generations, but also solidified his own rule. After sorting out internal affairs, Yang Jian began to focus on national reunification. In 587 AD, the Sui Dynasty conquered western Liang, removing obstacles in the Chun Dynasty. The following year, Yang Jian appointed Prince Jin Yangguang as commander, leading 500,000 troops to attack the Chun Dynasty. The next year, with the help of his great ally, Han Qinhu, the Chun Dynasty was destroyed. In 590 AD, Yang Jian pacified Lingnan. He persuaded Lady Shan to surrender. Thus, the entire nation was unified. The Sui Dynasty ended nearly 300 years of division. After unification, Yang Jian became even more diligent in governance, creating the famous Kai Wang reign. As we know, in ancient times, population size represented national strength. During the Kai Wang era, the population of the Sui Dynasty reached around 46 million, 3 times the population during Emperor Taizong's Zhengguan reign. Moreover, according to the outline of national history, in Yang Jian's later years, the country's accumulated wealth could sustain the people for 50 or 60 years. This fully demonstrated the Sui Dynasty's great national strength at the time. However, as a great emperor, besides governing the country well, he also had to choose a qualified successor for the empire. The always capable Yang Jian found himself troubled by this issue, because his crown prince, Yang Yong, was a huge disappointment. First of all, Yang Jian lived frugally. He despised extravagance and indulgence. But Yang Yong loved music and dancing, often inviting scholars to drink and compose poems. Second, his mother, Empress Dugu, detested men taking concubines. Yet Yang Yong had many concubines, even causing his legitimate wife to die of depression. Because of these behaviors, Yang Yong greatly displeased his parents. Meanwhile, Yang Jian's second son, Yang Guang, behaved in the opposite way. For instance, Yang Guang had only his wife, Zhao Fei, and no other concubines. Moreover, the musical instruments in his home were covered in dust. Some even lacked strings, indicating that he never indulged in entertainment or excesses. Actually, all of this was Yang Guang's trick to seize the crown prince's position, a ploy to win his parents' trust. In the year 600 AD, Yang Guang's disguise paid off. The position of crown prince in the empire changed hands. Yang Jing ordered Yang Yong to be demoted to a commoner, and confined him to the inner palace. Appointed the second son, Yang Guang, as the crown prince. This is the same Yang Guang who later doomed the Sui Empire, the notorious Emperor Yang of Sui. In the year 604 AD, the 64-year-old Yang Jian fell ill. According to the records of the Book of Sui, the emperor lay carefully in the Renshou Palace, shaking hands and bidding farewell to his officials. He sighed and passed away in the great palace. Yang Jian calmly passed away, peacefully. He even shook hands and bid farewell to his ministers, saying, "I will go ahead first. I'll wait for you over there." The scene was extremely harmonious. However, according to the Zizi Tengjian, it adds a more dramatic, knife-edge atmosphere. At that time, Yang Guang was attending to the seriously ill Yang Jian in the Renshou Palace. Seeing his father was about to pass away, he wrote a letter to Yang Su outside the palace, asking what to do after his father's death. But unfortunately, Yang Su's reply was mistakenly delivered to Yang Jian. After reading it, Yang Jian was furious. At this moment, the concubines of Yang Jing were causing a commotion. A lady hurried over in disarray, accusing the crown prince of improper conduct. Upon hearing this, Yang Jing slumped over the bed, shouting that his son was a disgrace to the family, and that even his loyal servant Dugu had betrayed him, meaning he rebuked his wife for having raised such an unfilial son, not only hoping for his early death, but also daring to flirt with his concubines. He was worse than a beast. Then Yang Jian ordered his eldest son Yang Yong to return to Renshou Palace, preparing to depose Yang Guang and reinstate Yang Yong as the heir. Upon hearing this, Yang Guang, naturally, he didn't sit idly by. He immediately imprisoned the officials sent to deliver the decree, and had his own men take control of Renshou Palace. Finally, he had all the people around Yang Jian driven to another palace. He assigned his confidant Zhang Heng to attend to his father. Before long, Emperor Wen of Sui Yangjian passed away at the age of 64. Logically, Yang Guang was known to be a master of disguise. He should have been very disciplined. He wouldn't risk it all for a fleeting pleasure, to flirt with Lady Xuanhua. Moreover, by that time he was already the crown prince. All he needed to do was wait, and eventually, the throne would be his. Whether or not this story is true. Anyway, that year, 36-year-old Yang Guang finally reached the pinnacle of power in the Sui Dynasty. Yang Guang began his ambitious statecraft. He named his reign Day, demonstrating his attitude as emperor. He had no intention of being a passive ruler who merely maintained the empire. Instead, he aimed to be like Qin Shi Huang and Emperor Wu of Han, building an everlasting legacy. But when you take steps too large, you can end up in trouble. His first grand project after taking power was the construction of the eastern capital Luoyang. He mobilized over 1 million laborers. In just 14 months, a magnificent capital city rose from the ground in Luoyang. But it came at the cost of many lives. During the Eastern Jin dynasty, all the officials were very strict. About 14 or 15 out of every 100 people died, which means nearly half of the laborers died during the construction of Luoyang. However, this was not the end. After the completion of Luoyang, Yang Guang had a new idea. As we all know, to get rich, one must first build roads. So, Yang Guang decided to excavate the Grand Canal. From the year 605 to 610 AD, it took only 6 years to connect various counties in the north. With Yuhang in the south, the Sui-Tang Grand Canal was completed in its entirety. Even by today's standards, this speed is truly astonishing. But according to historical records, this enormous project caused over 2 million deaths among the people. We don't know if that's true or not. In addition, to emulate Qin Shi Huang and Emperor Wu of Han, Yang Guang began to wage wars in all directions. He marched south to Linyi, north to Khitan. To the left, he crushed the Tuju, and to the right, he seized the Ryukyu Islands. He struck fear into the Tuju. This made the Sui dynasty appear as a powerful nation, with many tributary states. But the nation's resources were stretched to their limits. This sowed the seeds for the eventual downfall of the Sui dynasty. Speaking of this, Yang Duang's most fatal mistake was the 3 campaigns against Goguryeo. Yeo. In the year 611 AD, Yang Guang gathered all the empire's troops, totaling over 1.13 million soldiers to attack Goguryeo. Yeo. Unfortunately, under his poor command, the Sui army had countless battle opportunities along the way. In the end, the Sui army was defeated. They lost over 300,000 soldiers. For Yang Guang, this was a matter of pride that had to be regained. So in 613 AD, he led a second campaign to Goguryeo in person. This time, he learned his lesson. He no longer commanded blindly. He let everyone handle things more freely. In other words, he let them fight with full freedom. But fate, as if it were intentionally opposing Yang Guang. Just as Goguryeo was about to fall, news came from the rear. Yang Zhuanggan had rebelled. Yang Guang had no choice but to withdraw his army to suppress it. After the suppression, the national strength of the Sui dynasty had been severely drained. Domestic peasant uprisings were becoming more intense. However, the stubborn Yang Guang still launched a third eastern campaign. This time, Goguryeo had figured out Yang Guang's temperament. When they saw the Sui army approaching, they immediately sought peace and refused to fight. Yang Guang's pride was satisfied, and he actually withdrew his troops. In the end, hundreds of thousands of soldiers had once again gone on a costly and pointless free tour, without gaining any benefits. According to historians, the conscription for these 3 campaigns exceeded the workforce for several of the previous large projects combined. In short, it drained all the resources of the Sui dynasty. It also forced the people across the country to rebel. Later, as he lost the people's support, Yang Guang knew his end was near. He began to indulge even more in pleasure. He ordered Wang Shikong in Jiangdu to find him countless beauties from the Jiangwei region. He spent his days indulging with them. After getting drunk, he would often ask himself in the mirror, "Who will sever this head? Whose blade will take my head?" However, as the saying goes, what you fear most will happen. After Yang Guang repeated this a few times, someone really came to take his head. In 618 AD, fully armed rebels stormed into Yang Guang's palace. At this point, Yang Guang knew there was no way out of death today. He said, "The Son of Heaven has his own way to die. Bring the poisoned wine." However, the eunuchs and palace maids had long since fled. The rebel soldiers naturally had no patience to prepare a cup of poisoned wine. So they directly came up to him and strangled Yang Guang with a white cloth. Thus, the Sui dynasty came to an end. Nowadays, when we talk about Emperor Yang of Sui, most of the evaluations are negative. One could say he is cursed for eternity. However, one thing we cannot deny is that he had great ambition. What he did brought harm in the present, but laid a foundation for benefits in the long term. It was just that he was too impatient and too arrogant.